Why are you running for re-election?
So I want to continue the work that I'm already doing, serving the neighbors of the 36th district. Since I got in just 2025, from May to December, we managed to bring in over $18 million in funding to our district. And we did an additional over 13 million to our school districts. And I really believe that service to our community and doing everything we can to make sure that government is very efficient and responds very well is very important, and it's what we should be doing in office. So that's why I'm running for another 4 years.
What are the biggest issues facing voters in your district heading into the 2026 elections?
So the rising costs of basic goods and services are especially in housing. That's a big issue, and I'm trying to work with that. But that goes into rent, mortgage, insurance, groceries, utilities, medical services, you name it. All of those are big issues. So I'm working on a lot of different areas, uh, either on my own or with support in the Senate, especially, but in both chambers to try and address those costs.
Talk about how you govern for all residents, not just political allies.
So I always work to try and help all of my constituents, regardless of where they land politically. And some of the things I do that is pull together a really excellent official team. We work with constituent services. I get out everywhere I can in the district, whether it's rural or urban, to talk to people about what is happening and what we can do to serve our district the best.
Which 2026 state Senate candidate in Lancaster County was the first Democrat elected to PASD 36 in over 130 years?
Well, as silly as it is, it's me, Senator James Andrew Malone, 36th District. So,
How did you win the special election?
so I started reaching out to our neighbors, house to house. I did a lot of listening and asking folks to invest in me with their vote. I'm often uh, I often spent walking 4 to 8 miles, going door to door, calling individuals, going to um, uh, group meetings and asking them for support and hearing what their issues were.
Why are Lancaster County schools underfunded, and what is your plan to fix that?
So the underfunding has like a really long history, right? It started back literally in like 1880s when we decided to uh, fund the majority of um, public schools on local property taxes. So that already set up winners and losers and issues of that nature across the board. And then we exaggerated the problem um, in 1990s, someone, when we flipped the majority of the cost of special education from being state covered to being local covered. So all of those processes have set up um, more and more of an issue of underfunding. And then we um, and then we originally had all that issue happening, and then we finally had a state Supreme Court decision that said, "Hey, you've got to fix this." And we did start with a few different formulas to start to correct that. Um, and at every level, people are working on correcting the issue. We have school districts that are reorganizing to make sure that they're using the most effective way for their teachers and their students together. We have at the county and state level trying to organize how we're most effectively covering kids' educations. Um, we also have another exacerbation to the cost is the way we implemented cyber charter schools, and they are not really working for everybody who's enrolled in them, and they are costing a lot of our districts way more than what it costs for them to run a cyber. So a lot of our different solutions also include ways of um, really effectively tracking everyone's progress rather than just being very heavily test based. We also are working on different ways of how we can really um, make a correction for all of that extra spend that we're losing in the public schools, specifically to cyber schools that are not serving our children. So some of those are simple improvements of um, baseline performance, right? If you're not performing well, then you shouldn't be taking public funds, right? If you're not performing at equivalent of that public school. Some of the other options that have been proposed out there and that we're working on include, like, if a public school has a cyber option, then maybe they should not need to pay public funds for an external cyber charter school. But we have a lot of options that we're trying to work to correct, um, the gaps that are happening.
Talk through your practical plan to address Lancaster County's housing shortage.
So we have a couple of pieces. We want to encourage redevelopment of blighted areas, right? Increase density. We want to work with municipalities to encourage our neighbors to be more comfortable with higher density. We have some places that have had plans for 20 years that this is going to be a high density area, right? And now it's come through, developers come up and said, hey, we're ready to build and everything, and all of a sudden we have neighbors that are going, hey, that, no, it would ruin my view, and things like that. And it's real, it becomes very real when you're a municipal leader and you're sitting at a public meeting and you have 30 or 60 or 80 people show up and say, hey, we don't want this, even though it's been in the plan for 25 years, right? So there's a lot of that negotiation that really needs to happen. And we are working on creating a repository that would be statewide so that municipalities could have guidelines for best practices for ordinances, and hopefully between pushing the education across there and also with kind of synchronizing policies while still maintaining that local control, we can end up increasing our housing, decreasing the cost that it and hopefully the time that it takes to get houses out into market, and hopefully all of that will be helpful for resolving the housing issues.
What makes you different from a typical partisan politician in Harrisburg?
So I think some of the really big differences are I'm very concerned with how I'm supporting my constituents. And I always start by asking just a few questions, right? Are we doing the most good with the least amount of harm? Um, so why are my constituents asking for something? Like literally, what are they asking for and why? Because a lot of times we'll get a, there'll be a group that's asking for um, a result, and when you dig in, then you find out that there's maybe a policy change that would be more helpful than a legislative action, right? So, what are the constituents asking for and why? And then I think sometimes, I'm also asking, like, am I listening to my constituents? And then am I doing honest, hard work? And am I increasing the efficiency of our government? So I think that those are very important pieces. And I think that those are pieces that aren't always followed when you get into more of a partisan or a career politician.
Why are property taxes so high in Lancaster County, and what's your plan to lower them?
So this is an interesting one because um, property taxes are um, actually uh, not super high compared to other counties in the Commonwealth, right? But here in Lancaster County, we have the blessing and the curse of having very high value land, high value property. So, a percentage off of a high value is going to be a higher number. Um, some of the things that we're trying to do to improve that are some of our solutions with funding and reorganizing funding for public schools to relieve that burden. Some others are how do we relieve the burden of property taxes on older owners, and then how do we also organize so that we have our more targeted tax relief back in focus, right? Because a lot of our programs were started back in the 70s and have been slowly diluted and diluted, so less of those funds are made available specifically for reducing costs, especially with seniors. And so I think some of our work needs to be to reinvigorate those requirements.
Talk through how you support protecting mail-in ballots and voting rights.
So first, we want to be really clear. We already know that our mail-in ballots are very secure, right? And we have an extremely good system here in Pennsylvania. Um, they're very successfully run by our counties, and we could definitely use more people volunteering and taking part. But I think we really need to make sure that we look at how we can expand our system to make sure that every citizen gets a vote. And then in a wider picture, I think we really need to look at a lot of the fair districting to make sure that we get that into legislation so that no matter who's in power on a political side, all of our voters have a say and continue to do so.